It's Friday, and I'm back with the next in our Fanzine Friday series, taking a look at Demonsblood number 4 from 1979. Please stick around. I'm AZ Mountaineer, and this is our channel, Old School Rules, where we celebrate the community of old school gamers and grognards who like classic RPGs, miniatures, magazines, and everything that goes with it. Each week on the Fanzine Friday series, I take a fanzine from my collection off the shelf for a closer look, and today that is Demonsblood number 4 from September of 1979. Hope you enjoy today's video. So today's video takes a look at this fanzine. It is the size we're used to, heavy stock cover, pages folded in half. Brian Dolton is the editor. He comes to us from the UK, and this is from around September of 1979. They don't put any dates in this particular fanzine, but they do give you publication deadlines for the next issue, and based on that it looks like this one's probably from around 1979. So let's take a look at the cover. This time the cover is done by Brian Dolton himself. He said he didn't get any cover, I don't think he had got any cover artwork until after he'd already put this together. This is a drawing of a character that he plays, I think, in his own campaign. Alright, so here's the table of contents. It's a pretty big one, as you can see, a lot of stuff going on. Bestial Growls is his editorial. So page 2 just gives subscription information, table of contents, which I've put together here, and contribution information. And then, as you know, this one is sort of an APA style fanzine, and so most of the contents are things people have sent in, 3-4 page mini fanzines, if you will, that he puts together and collates for the overall issue. He does mention he's continuing to get a very nice steady stream of information, and tells people at this point now, since he's only going to have about 36 pages, that he is picking the best stuff, and if your stuff hasn't gotten in yet, just be patient. He'll try to get you in the next issue. He mentioned last time that he was had not passed his university exams and was going to be looking for employment. He mentions here he's still looking for employment, and so it's relevant because he's saying, I can't afford to keep losing money on this. I'm raising the price just a little bit. And he also says something interesting we're going to talk about here a little bit later, about his plans to do some other things related to role-playing games. Oddities is a mini fanzine we'll take a look at. Player's background is an article. We'll take a look at Halosian Tales, Pot Continues to Boil, Werewolf Comments, Raven Croaks, 3 Golden Apples, Nil Desperandem. Those are all mini fanzines. The Mysteries of Mentir is the postal D&D game we'll take a look at. Things That Go Bump in the Night are new monsters. The review is done by one of the fanzine contributors, Andy Ravenscroft. And it is a review of Swords Sorcery, the game by SPI. And then the character file this time is back to its sort of random miscellaneous pre-rolled NPCs with a little bit of color commentary about their background, motivations, or personalities. As you can see, we have a lot of contributors this time. Brian Dolton is the editor. Paul Blackwell does both contribution as well as art for much of this. Steve Barber, Graham Stableford, Dave Cooper, Tom Keynes, Dave Davies, Colin Ingham, Barney Sloane, Andy Ravenscroft, Graham Staplehurst. Those folks all make contributions to the fanzine. Most of those are in the form of mini fanzines, although we also, back in the monster section, I'll give you some specific mention. We had some folks whose only contribution was sending in a new monster. So this is Bestial Growls, his editorial, and I mentioned it generally when we started, but I want to pull out this printed area and let you guys take a look at it. So he says, I'm thinking about getting set up as a limited company. I haven't done that yet, but I'm thinking I'll call it Beast Productions Limited. I'm pretty sure that Brian Dolton is the one who founds what we call Beast Enterprise Limited, which puts out a very professional magazine. Really, I call it more of a magazine than a fanzine. In a few years later, called Tortured Souls, and it's packed full of D&D and other, but mostly D&D adventures and content, including content from his own campaign. And so, and he talks there about what was motivating him sort of Judges Guild style dungeons, right, or TSL modules. He says they're kind of expensive. I can put together a 40-page booklet, which in fact is what Tortured Souls is, in that same format with either dungeons, towns, or other areas, right? And talks about being able to do it at a much better price. So anyway, just a little snippet of history there I thought was interesting. So the next one is Oddities, and this is Steve Barber's contribution. And he says, I've got a new ribbon in my typewriter and I'm ready to go. And so he's got ideas to give your player characters and NPCs a little bit of background flavor, if you will. And so he says, the way I'll do this is you do a D100 roll. And if you get, for example, the main table only goes up to 67%. If you roll over that, so 68 and above, you get no particular modification or background. But so it's things like you're particularly patient, so you'll be better prepared to set traps or listen, or impatient, so you won't do those things, right? Brave or coward, short-tempered, calm, excitable, bossy, paranoid, bloodthirsty, easily led, sort of stone-willed, pyromaniac, decisive, indecisive, outspoken, proud, humble, shy, etc., etc. And so those things do a little bit of, I guess you'd say, personality for you to follow, and some of them give you a slight bonus on some things as well. Like if you're easily led, then you might be highly susceptible to a suggestion spell, and if you sort of have a stone will, then maybe you're less susceptible. So it does anticipate a little bit, very small chance of some bonus in the game. Mostly it's for personality. But then he also has class-based tables, and those do give bonuses, right? So the fighter, if you roll 1 to 50, you get a +1 with some type of weapon. You may or may not choose to use that weapon. It's just the weapon you were used to before you started your adventuring career. Thieves and assassins have a table. Magic users, which he includes magic users, illusionists, clerics, and druids, have a table. In between the thieves and the magic user table, he says this table can be used for monks. You know, in my game world, I tend to think, well, he might have meant the thieves table, but the way monks were treated as almost like a subclass of clerics, I assume he meant the magic user table. Although when you look at monk skills, the way that particular table works, it's worthless for a monk, but who knows what he was thinking for sure. But in the magic user table, it gives you a, if you roll 1, you get a +1 with a weapon. Otherwise, you get some type of a bonus with a type of magic. And so the left-hand column is what your bonus would be. If you get a 40, you get a 41 and above, you get nothing. You get a 40, you roll twice, and now you're going to have 2 competencies. But on the second roll, you get a competency and I guess you'd call a incompetency. And so, for example, if you got fire, you're incompetent. As your second bonus, your incompetency then would be cold. And the competency is basically factored in as a -1 on the opponent's saving throws when you use that type of magic, +1 on your own saving throws when facing that type of magic, or some extension of your range or duration if you don't have any type of, if there's not something that gives a saving throw. So those are the ideas for his tables. A very common theme, if you've watched a lot of these fanzine videos, this idea of a little bit of a roll at the beginning to give you either some personality, some background, or some particular skill bonus is fairly common and popular. And this one's as well done as any of them, I think. It's clearly well thought out, and I kind of like that idea to give you one more thing to roll for that could be really helpful, or also potentially not something you'll ever use in game. Related to that, we have an article from Graham Stableford called Player's Background and Personal Characteristics. And again, this was an idea to give you tables and charts to flesh out your character. So you roll 3d6 to get your height, another 3d6 to get your weight, and there's some modifiers in there that he's got worked out based on race, age, 2d6, and based on your character's race, and then your die roll, it gives you a starting age. You have life expectancy in there, and he's got an idea of how when you get close to the end, you might have to start checking for your ability. You might die of old age. I've never in my life had a campaign where that became an issue, not even with unnatural aging effects from monsters coming into play. Another thing, though, that he has in here that I thought was interesting, and this one's a slightly different take, is you roll for your D100 for your father's, it's a little bit sexist, but paternalistic society, I suppose, was in effect. But you roll for your father's profession, and then that would give you a potential bonus based on your upbringing around someone who was in that profession. So if your father was a buccaneer, you might have a background ability to know how to sail. If your father was a minstrel, you might have a bonus to your charisma. Father's a juggler, bonus to dexterity. And also some more practical things, just like, you know, various types of craftsmen and merchants or other professions. And some of those things don't give you any bonus, some of them do. And as he says, you know, if you don't like that, feel free to tone that down if the bonuses are too much. And then he also has the idea that you roll for whether your father has died, in which case you might inherit something. And he also has a chart to roll for your number of siblings, so you might have to divide that, although, you know, if you're going sort of chivalry and sorcery idea of our world's way, then the oldest child probably gets everything and everybody else gets basically nothing, right? He didn't go quite there. But anyway, it's an interesting article. I thought pretty well thought out. And again, these ideas have given something a little extra color to your characters. All right. So if you saw my videos on the Underworld Oracle, they had this concept called the Halls of Testing. And as you know, I was a big fan of the concept and just thought they were a lot of fun. Well, I'm assuming that is where David Flynn's contribution in Halosian Tales number 3 comes from. And this is the Halls of Testing for Clerics. And it's pretty similar to all the other Halls of Testing. You can only be this character class. You pick a spot on your campaign world, and a young, usually first level cleric, can go into this place and potentially earn experience points if he or she can make the way through and survive. This one, as you might expect, is geared for clerics. There's lots of undead in here. Frankly, a single cleric's going to get killed when I look at this. There's just it's way too hard. Maybe if you make every single one of your turning rolls, then you can just sort of walk right through, but that's not going to happen because they're not all skeletons by any stretch. And so I don't know if you play, you know, in Underworld Oracle, they play tested these things oftentimes. I don't know if you play tested this thing. I mean, I think you're going to get killed every single time. I like the Halls of Testing, as you know. I love that he's bringing it back here in a different fanzine, but I don't think there's any way you're going to survive. And then he's got some, at the end here in his Halosian Tales, he's got a little comment about some of the prior fanzines. Okay, so our next mini fanzine is The Pot Continues to Boil Over. And this one takes a look at a couple of things from his this guy's home campaign. He says it's a little bit of a mix of D&D with some chivalry and sorcery, Bifrost, MA, which I think is Metamorphosis Alpha, Gamma World, and other games sort of woven in. And he says the topic for today is looking at magic user and clerical spell abilities. And essentially he says for clerics, he doesn't like the similarity. He wants to make it more of a prayer-based thing. He basically says for each level that you go up, you get access to a higher level of miracles, as he's calling them. And then he has a very short list, 1 or 2 miracles you can basically pray for at each level. Part of this, I think, is the original game didn't have nearly as many spells, for example, as the AD&D Player's Handbook had when it came out. But also I think he's intentionally much more limiting in what he's going to allow the clerics to do. It's got basically a system. He uses he likes the Geas system that Brian Dolton came up with in the earlier issue of Demonsblood, where you sort of track how good or how evil your player's behavior is. And the further you move along that continuum, the higher chance you have your prayer to your deity will be successful, and also the stronger the result would be. And so he says basically, for example, second level, you can do 2 per day. You could do second level, sort of in what he's calling second level of his miracles or first level miracles, but it's up to you how you want to pray for those. And then for the magic users, he's doing a modified system like a lot of people did. And he's got a essentially a spell point system as well as a spell success roll that you make. So, he says playing with magic is never a guarantee, and so he's got something here. It's 5 times the level of the magic user minus 5 times the level of the spell. That's your base casting score, and then that's multiplied by, or modified by some intelligence bonuses. And he says this isn't the whole system. I think he says you can write to him and get some more information about it. But essentially, every time you cast it correctly, you're going to get a bonus of 5% to that roll for that particular spell. So let's say you cast, Dispel Magic or Magic Missile, which wasn't available originally, but that's a whole other topic. And you would cast it successfully. The next time you try to cast it, you're going to get a bonus plus 5. You cast that successfully, next time you get a bonus plus 10, etc., up to a maximum 95% chance of success. And then if you roll 96 to 100, that's always something bad happens. And he's got a separate table to determine whether it's just a fizzle out, you lose spell points, you suffer some type of mental harm, you forget all your spells, up all the way up through insanity. So interesting alternate system. Lots of people came up with alternate systems, certainly for their magic users, I think, early on. And then he's got a couple of notes from his home campaign. One is, he says his last time out, he and his other characters were killed by a group of vampires. Wonders if others have ideas. Are they really supposed to be this hard? He says they encountered 14 vampires. I mean, that's going to be a TPK for most low to mid-level characters without much doubt, right? And then gives a little bit of background about some stuff that's going on in his home campaign, how his paladin, he's got a cursed paladin who got cursed, and how he's talking about how that campaign has unfolded as in his quest to become uncursed. And has some ideas for things he might talk about, in the future. Give some feedback on the articles that were in the earlier edition, which he said, generally he liked how the magazine is coming along. He thought the people did a good job. Really enjoyed the wilderness map that Brian Dolton shared, and asked for some additional ideas from people about how they're running their wilderness campaigns, because he says that's not something that he has done. So apropos to that, we come to Werewolf Comments, which are Brian Dolton's, his mini-fanzine. And now he gives a little bit of feedback on the other guys' articles from last time, and then he talks about how he runs his tips for running a wilderness campaign. He says most of his campaign actually is, as he calls it, above ground, and he finds that to be a much more interesting way to play the campaign. And he talks about the prep work he does in the beginning. It's really important to give detail, so things like what the weather is like, the detail you give about the scenery around you. He says, don't be sort of generic. Don't say you're walking through a forest, right? Describe it as vividly as you can. He said that really helps bring life to what's going on. The same thing with NPCs, etc. And then he gives an example of a small village that he's done. The letters are buildings with specific people in them. The other ones aren't populated. He's got a couple little things you could go to. There's a cave that has some lore to it, and this thing called the Black Ring, which is a crumbled wizard's tower, has some lore to it. So it's a little small sort of side quest adventures that wouldn't take very long at all are here, but a very good example. I mean, and he does a great job when he, as you pick up from the NPC stuff that he includes at the end of a lot of these fanzines, all of his key people have stats, have a little bit of background, a little something about their personality. So seems like he's very good at sort of fleshing out the detail around things like this. He says he's got some cities, and he says that's way too big because he's got so much stats and so much the size of the map, etc., to ever try and squeeze into a little fanzine like this. So he says, so for now, you're going to have to get like little towns, little villages, about all he could probably get in there. Then we come to Andy Ravenscroft's mini fanzine, and this is the second contribution. I'm really enjoying the quality of what he does. His, I think somebody else also came with their own art. His comes with its own art in here. He says this time Quentin Manley did all of the art. So he's got the little logo of the raven at the top, and then he's got the int with getting tinkled on by this dog down here. Andy gives us some comments on the stuff from the prior version, in particular the ambidexter rules and the stuff from the Chronicles of Kavar, which he also liked the tables he had for statting up sections of your town, which I thought were quite good in the last one. Little comments about the new Fritz Lieber novels that have come out. And then he's got basically a mini adventure in here called Clearwater Caverns. he discusses these caverns at the top right connect to a larger system he calls the Endless Caverns that are part of his home campaign. But here's, as he said, you could always just close that off or have it go to something of your own. Here's just a little cavern system he's got. It's excellent. It's probably one good, day of evening of adventuring with a party. It's very well done. It's got a couple different entrances. It's got some nice ecology to it. There's a little cluster of troglodytes down in one side. The monsters that are in here all make perfect sense. He's also got a couple of he's got one new monster here, and then he has a couple of magic items in here as well. His new monster will come to in a second, but let me give you the two magic items, which are great, which you can find. It was a guy, must have had something to do with lightning, because he's got the lightning blade, which is a sword, and the lightning shield. The lightning shield is basically +1, has a lightning bolt emblazoned on it. When you have the shield and the sword in your hand at the same time, the shield will then protect you from any lightning or magic missile attacks. The lightning blade is a +1 sword, which is just a normal sword in that respect, and it has a special runes inscribed. If you can read them, they give you a little story about lightning, how you can call on lightning to protect yourself. If you do, the blade's going to turn into a bolt of lightning that will shoot out, hit your opponent for 66 damage, but then that's it. Like, the blade doesn't come back. It turns itself into a bolt of lightning that one time, and now you've got a hilt, which is very nice, but no longer usable as a weapon. So I like that. Was a very clever item. Here are his new monsters. He's got the giant vampire bat, which is described, which is essentially a 2-hit dice creature that's in his dungeon here, or his cavern, that attacks, obviously bites you and sucks out your blood. And then he's got this sketch. You remember how much I like the sketch that was in the last issue of Demonsblood. And here's another fantastic sketch by Quentin. And he says the last one has stats, but Quentin has stats for it. He hasn't shared it, so hopefully he'll do that in the future issue. Same thing for this. No stats for this today, but this thing is really, really interesting looking, right? If you just stop and look at it. I think they've got a neck with the head pointed up here on the side, a tail, and then the legs are kind of funky looking. Really, really good art, I think, and really creative mind to come up with these different ideas. So this is 3 Golden Apples Part 1. This is a new contributor. This is it's just written by Simon Thaumaturgus, the Archmage, translated here by Tom Keynes. And if you remember, Tom's been a contributor to some of the other fanzines we've taken a look at. The thing he has here first is a new subclass of fighter called the Dervish. It's essentially desert nomad, extremely aggressive fighter. He's got several stat prerequisites: strength, wisdom, dexterity, and constitution. Must be lawful of any good, neutral, or evil. Basically like a fighter. +2 attack, -2 penalty against undead. They don't do undead. They do get some clerical abilities once they level up a couple levels. So only a couple of weapons. +1 to hit in combat always, because they're such a aggressive fighter. I would probably make them +1 to hit, -1 armor class to sort of counterbalance that. They can use what's called a throwing stick. It's a unique weapon they can choose to be proficient in. It doesn't do any damage, but you only have to roll against armor class 9, and then you'll get a chance to trip the opponent or horse or creature, whatever you throw at. Anything that's moving on legs essentially can be tripped up. You take the movement rate at which the opponent is moving, ×2, then add the strength of the dervish who's throwing it, and that's your chance. So it's a relatively small chance, but it gives you a chance of tripping. And then they get this clerical spell use that starts, I think, at level 3, and they get sort of like monks. At some levels, they get special, additional special abilities. Let's look. Yeah, so level 3, they start getting clerical spells, and it's only 1 spell for a couple levels. Then it goes at maximum level 12. They're getting 2 first, 2 second, and 1 third level spell. That's it. So their special abilities are kind of interesting. So one is combat charge, where they can just run at the opponent, and when they choose to do that, they can move at double speed to reach melee. They're very good with horsemanship, so they've got a strong ability to control their own horse, or even a random horse they just grab. They can get control of it very quickly. They can do something called a strength surge that adds 3 points to their strength for a period of time, d6 +1 melee rounds. if they meditate and sort of like work themselves up into a bit of a frenzy. The blade whirl, where they spin their blade in succession, creating essentially like a fan effect that'll knock aside melee attacks. For some reason, it doesn't work at all against missile attacks, but can knock most melee attacks away, or basically create a spinning shield, essentially, to protect against spear thrusts or any other type of striking weapon. Or they can go into the death frenzy in melee, and they'll do double damage for every hit, but if they choose to go into the death frenzy, then they can't stop until every enemy they can see is dead. And so he will just keep fighting. So that's sort of a good counterbalance against that, I think, right? They have certain restrictions. They can't lose their lawful alignment, or they'll basically become a regular fighter. No men-at-arms, servants, aides, etc. They can't ever build a stronghold because they're more nomadic, and they obviously have certain limitations on the arm and the armor that they can use. So that's it for this. Pretty well thought out, very interesting, and again, the long line of people wanting to add subclasses or new classes to the game. It's a pretty constant theme in early D&D. There's a little note in here from Brian Dolton saying he likes that he likes the new Dervish character class as well. And he said this he thinks was a good one. The samurai from issue 2 were both good ones. He said, because there's some criticism, people adding too many, making them, the new ones are always super overpowered, tendency to be super overpowered, etc. The other thing that you don't see in what I'm showing you on the screen is, for whatever reason, Brian Dolton loves to draw Marvel superhero characters in the blank spaces around his fanzine, and so he's got them peppered in there. He always sort of writes Marvel, credit to Marvel for the original image. So next we have the contribution from Paul Blackwell. It's called Nil Desperandem, I believe. And this is actually about a general article about space role-playing games and space combat in role-playing games, and how they don't really account for the three-dimensionality that comes from being in spaceships. And so he goes through his ideas about how all that should work. The next is the Mysteries of Mentir, which is the postal D&D game. They're still getting warmed up. He gives a bunch more background information about how his game's going to work, with upkeep of lodging, the obligation of clerics and paladins to donate to churches, and also other good players could as well. I guess if you donate on a regular basis, you can get a discount on your resurrection spells. Talks about reincarnation. They have guilds which charge 1% of your experience points earned in gold pieces as donation to the guild is what you have to do. Some ideas about the rules around town in terms of fighting and carrying weapons. A few rumors, a little bit of background about some things that have been happening in the town, and then an explanation about how you'll send your orders in, and also a list of the 5 or 6 people who have created characters so far to play in this game world. And he just says, when you get your Demonsblood each month, you've got 2 weeks to send in your orders. I'll read those. Next time around, I'll be able to tell you what has happened, and that's how the game will sort of move forward. Okay, so now it's time for new monsters, things that go bump in the night. The first one is by Andy Ravenscroft, and it is the Night Stalker, and he has a little bit of an artwork there. It's a foul, misshapen humanoid creature that stalks through the shadows at night and tries to basically eat and rob unwary citizens. He moves like a 9th level thief, all the hide in shadows, etc. And if he bites you, you have to save or become groggy. Lowers your to hit, strength, movement, etc. And if he can kill you, then he will eat you and then rob you. 4 hit dice monster, armor class 4. Not too tough, nothing special needed to hit the creature. It is corporeal, even though it looks a little bit like a shadow in the drawing. Next, Barney Sloane contributes the Breeze Beast, which has the head and upper torso of an old man that then moves into a wispy white cloud. It says it's essentially a mischievous elemental being that can use invisibility, trip, push, or gust of wind to taunt people. This is mischievous, so it'll like to do damage to you, but generally at 7 plus 2 hit dice, so kind of hard to kill. Next, and I really appreciate this one, which is from Graham Staplehurst, and this is the Zinc Dragon. And he says, look, you have to have a zinc dragon because we have brass dragons, right? And he said, so the only way you get a brass dragon is a zinc dragon and a copper dragon had to mate, and that's how brass dragons are created. In which he points out then, and if that's the case, that means there must have been brass dragons and tin dragons out there to create the bronze dragon. So he's got this whole metallurgical concept of additional dragons that need to be created. And so that's basically the only reason he creates this one. And finally, we have from our editor, Brian Dolton, the Ghost. His version of the Ghost turns as I believe it's a white. And what I like about this one is it can be a mist form or corporal. And it has a 5-round transformation to shift from one to the other. During the first 3 rounds, or the last 3, depending which direction it's going, it can still be hit before it becomes mist-like. When it's mist-like, it can't attack, and it heals 1 hit point per turn in that form, can pass through semi-solid things, including wooden walls or doors. Killed by a ghost, you become a ghost. That's, I think, the way the traditional monster in the game is done as well. And the other thing he gives these folks is a 1 to 3 cold spells they can use per day, and it'll do 2d6 damage of cold damage if you don't make your saving throw. This is armor class 4, hit dice 4. He does not require any special weapons to hit if it's in the corporal form. Turn as a white is what it says. So that's it for the Ghost. The last thing we have here is the review I mentioned at the beginning of Swords Sorcery with Andy Ravenscroft, liked quite a bit, and then the character file, which has the just some random new NPCs for you. And then the very last page here is his survey. A lot of these guys, after a few episodes, break down and do a survey. You know, it's got the typical questions. Do you like this? Should it be longer? Do you want more of something, less of something? What did you like the most? What did you like the least? Do you play Dungeons & Dragons? Do you play or DM? How long have you played? What other types of things would you like to see in here? And also, a good question, if you don't subscribe, how are you finding this, right? What store, where are you finding your copies? And is there anything you'd like to change about the way generally we run the fanzine? So that's it for Demonsblood number 4. I'm really liking these. Thank goodness I found someone who traded some extra fanzines I had to get these, because these are fantastic. That's it for the Demonsblood number 4 from Brian Dolton, 1979. We'll be back next week with number 5, which I think comes out in November of 1979. Hope you guys are subscribed. Hope you are enjoying these videos. Please share with your friends in case they would like our content as well. Have a great weekend, everybody, and until next time, keep rolling 20s.